There's stories on the internet that spark arguments, spark curiosity, spark opinions, but every once in a while a story comes along that doesn't just spark reactions. It breaks hearts. That's exactly where we are today with the Whittaker family. And this time, the spotlight isn't on Patrick or Eric or Mark Lyda or even the people fighting online. This time, it lands squarely on someone who's been misunderstood for years, BJ. The internet has turned BJ into the villain, the one people blame, the one viewers criticize, the one whose name is used as a symbol of what went wrong in the Whittaker family. When people talk about the chaos happening around West Virginia, the most common sentence you'll hear is, "If it weren't for BJ." But here's the part almost nobody is willing to ask honestly. Is BJ really the cause of all the pain, or is she the product of it? Because when you strip away the headlines, the gossip, the anger, the finger-pointing, and even the crimes, BJ isn't just a name people talk about. She's someone who grew up on that same porch, in that same house, with the same lack of support, the same limitations, the same struggles, the same poverty, the same lack of access to mental health services, the same environment every other family member grew up in. The difference is, BJ was never taught how to survive without chaos. People repeat the accusations about her. She sold copper wire. She stole gas. She lied and said Larry was dead. She locked the phone away from Betty. She hit family members. She kept demanding money. Nobody is denying that these things happened. But people forget something that matters more than the list of wrongs. Those actions weren't part of a plan. They were signs of someone drowning. When a person is drowning, they grab onto anyone and anything near them. Not because they want to pull others down, but because they don't know how to stay afloat any other way. BJ has been called many things. A thief, a troublemaker, a danger, a manipulator. But rarely, if ever, has she been called what she truly is. A woman fighting addiction with no treatment, no structure, no guidance, no resources, and no boundaries. She isn't evil. She's lost. And it's easier for the world to point at a lost person than to point at the system that failed her. It is easier to blame BJ than to ask why nobody ever stepped in to help. Why no one created a plan for her? Why no one protected a vulnerable family from money and attention they were never prepared to receive? The truth is harsh. But if we're going to talk honestly about BJ, we have to talk about the real problem. Money entered the Whittaker family before support did. Fame arrived before protection did. Exposure happened before planning did. Viewers have argued for months over who kept the money, Eric, Patrick, or someone else. But nobody's asking the bigger question. Why did nobody think to provide a counselor? A guardian? A financial advisor? A social worker specialized in addiction? We threw attention at this family. We threw money into their lives. We threw cameras at them. We connected donors and content creators, fans and strangers, reporters and investigators. We created a whirlwind of involvement, but we never created a safety net. So what happens when sudden money hits a family that has never been taught how to handle money? What happens when attention lands on people who struggle with communication, boundaries, and trust? What happens when donations show up, but addiction is already present? The donations don't solve anything. They fuel what was already broken. And if BJ was not equipped to handle her life before, how could anyone expect her to handle money, pressure, jealousy, cameras, and online drama afterward? This is where the heartbreak comes in. BJ has become the person everyone blames, but she is also the person who should have been helped first. Instead of being treated as someone struggling with addiction, she has been treated as someone whose mistakes define her entire existence. Nobody has given BJ therapy. Nobody set up treatment. Nobody protected the family from her addiction. Nobody gave her alternatives, resources, opportunities, or structure. She was left to fail, and she did. But failure doesn't mean she's the villain. It means she's human. Meanwhile, look at what has happened around her. Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray have been removed. They're in state care. Nobody knows exactly where. The family hasn't been allowed to visit. Betty is heartbroken. Larry is angry and confused. APS has taken control. And everyone online has an opinion except the one thing this family needs most: solutions. BJ's mistakes didn't cause this alone. They were part of a cycle nobody prevented. And many who watched it happen only cared about one thing: content. This family has been filmed, followed, interviewed, photographed, discussed by strangers, used in arguments, used for views, used for profit, but not protected. The sadness isn't that BJ made poor decisions. The sadness is that those decisions were predictable. They were the natural outcome of untreated addiction, poverty, isolation, and exposure to sudden online money. And if we're being honest, the Whittaker story isn't a crime drama. It's a tragedy about how easily vulnerable people get lost when attention replaces action. BJ isn't the monster. She's the mirror reflecting everything this family has never been given. And here's the part that nobody online is ready for. There are conversations happening now that may change BJ's life forever. Real conversations, plans, possibilities, consequences, a new direction that could either destroy her future completely or finally give her a chance to get the support she has needed for years. What happens next with BJ might determine the future of the entire Whittaker family. And that's where part 2 takes us. Comment below. What do you think the biggest mistake was? Giving money? Lack of help? Addiction ignored? Or something else? Backhand index pointing down. When we ended part 1, one point stood out sharper than the rest. BJ is not the villain. She is the mirror of an environment that was never built for survival. But knowing that is one, BJ was never just another family member. She was a gatekeeper. For years, before cameras showed up, before documentary crews arrived, before YouTubers fought over views, BJ was already playing a role inside the household. She was the one who could leave. She was the one who could drive. She was the one who could talk fluently, negotiate, argue, and communicate with people outside the family. She wasn't just Betty's niece, nor just Larry's daughter. She was the boundary between the Whittakers and the world. The problem? She was still vulnerable herself. She struggled with addiction. She struggled with impulse control. She struggled with responsibility. But the family relied on her anyway, because they didn't have anybody else who could do what she did. That's how the cycle begins. A person with addiction becomes the family's bridge. A person who needs help becomes the family's helper. A person who needs boundaries becomes the one making decisions. When addiction mixes with responsibility, you don't get evil. You get chaos. And that chaos doesn't just stay inside, it spreads. BJ was never prepared for money, fame, or pressure. People ask, why did BJ take money? Here's another question. Why did anyone give it to her? When donations began, there were no rules. No structure. No legal guidance. No appointed guardian. No financial planner. No state advocate for the family. No therapist involved. No addiction counselor warning about risks. Instead, money showed up fast. Fame followed immediately. Cameras flashed, not just for documentaries, but for endless content. Every phone could become a news camera. Every YouTuber could show up without appointment, without documentation, without a plan. People knocked on their door. Some recorded without permission. Some even took things from the porch as souvenirs. Imagine what that does to a family with no training, no protection, and no social understanding of what online attention means. Hundreds of thousands of dollars floating around them. Hundreds of thousands of eyes watching them. Zero support. Zero structure. And right in the middle of that storm, BJ, a woman struggling with addiction, suddenly responsible. suddenly surrounded by attention, suddenly surrounded by outsiders, suddenly able to influence what gets said, who gets access, who gets money, who gets filmed, and how donations are handled. Is anyone shocked problems followed? The most painful reality: BJ did not know she was hurting the family. That's what addiction looks like. Addiction doesn't let people see consequences. It only lets them see survival in the moment. She wasn't stealing to hurt Betty. She wasn't lying to destroy Larry. She wasn't taking money because she hated her family. She was doing what addiction forces people to do: react, cope, survive, escape, numb, and repeat. Her actions were wrong, but addiction is deeper than wrong. Addiction removes control from the person living inside it. Instead of being treated like someone who needed intervention, BJ became the internet's scapegoat. She became the reason everything fell apart. She became the excuse to remove members from the home. Here's the twist nobody expected. Removing Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy wasn't done because of donations. It was done because there was no plan. People assume Adult Protective Services stepped in because of missing money. False. APS steps in only when the home environment becomes unsafe or unstable. And from the outside looking in, what did APS see? A family with an addiction problem nearby. Financial disputes involving online creators. Constant outside visitors filming, posting, asking questions. Zero money allocated toward improving the home. Arguments resulting in violence accusations. Chaos surrounding who controls communication. Donation access without accountability. Vulnerable adults exposed to exploitation. A legal dispute involving copper theft. A family suddenly gaining public attention at a dangerous scale. That's when APS makes a judgment. This home is now unstable. And that judgment has nothing to do with fame, donations, or YouTube drama. Those were symptoms, not causes. The cause was lack of support plus addiction plus exposure equals instability. So APS did what systems do when vulnerability and chaos meet. They separated the vulnerable members from a storm. Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy were not removed because of BJ alone. They were removed because BJ wasn't supported and because the family was exploited without protection. The hardest question: was removing them good or bad? The internet doesn't know how to answer that. Many viewers focus on the heartbreak. They see Betty crying because she misses the one she raised. They see Larry confused and angry, left without answers. They see the porch empty, the warmth missing, the family now fragmented. It feels cruel, but we also have to consider something painful. Were Ray, Timmy, and Lorraine finally somewhere safe? Somewhere clean? Somewhere with health care? Somewhere with consistent meals? Somewhere with warmth? Are they being treated for their needs? Are they finally in a place where addiction isn't controlling their home? Are they somewhere where couches aren't collapsing, where floors aren't rotting, where people aren't entering with cameras? Is it heartbreaking because it's wrong, or heartbreaking because it's finally right but arrived too late? The update everyone missed. BJ's future could decide theirs. What happens with BJ next matters for a reason most people don't understand. If BJ stabilizes, the family has a chance to reunite. If BJ gets treatment, supervised visits could be possible. If BJ enters a structured recovery plan, APS may reconsider her presence as a risk factor. If BJ refuses help or remains untreated, reunification becomes nearly impossible. The future of this family doesn't completely depend on donations. It definitely doesn't depend on YouTubers. It doesn't depend on who owns what channel. It depends on whether BJ gets help. Real help, not blame. Because if BJ becomes stable, then the home environment becomes stable. And if the environment becomes stable, APS has no reason to keep the family separated. That's what makes this moment. There's one thing that the cameras, interviews, and viral headlines have failed to show: what the Whittaker family actually looks like without BJ in the home. Everyone talked about her leaving. Everyone discussed why APS stepped in. Everyone argued over who was at fault. Yet no one paused long enough to ask, what does Betty's porch feel like now? What does silence look like when 3 lives are missing? And how does a family who never asked for the internet now survive its consequences? Because what's happening right now in West Virginia isn't just separation. It is grief with the lights still on. The empty porch no one likes to talk about. People have always associated the Whittakers with that porch. The chairs, the railings, Ray's random barks, Timmy's quiet leg crossing and subtle laughter, Lorraine's gentle, confused voice, Betty sitting at the far end, her eyes tired but protective, always watching the others with a mother's reflex. Now, that porch holds only 2 of them, Betty and Larry. And even though they're 2 adults who still have each other, the porch feels like a ghost town. It's quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful. It's quiet in a way that hurts. Because it's not just the family missing, it's the rhythm, the routine, the unspoken connection that existed between the ones who cannot fully speak. Ray used to make noise without meaning to, and somehow that noise held the house together. Lorraine used to sit beside Timmy and hum to herself, and that hum made the porch feel alive. Timmy used to laugh randomly, and that laughter reminded everyone that joy can come without explanation. People think silence is peaceful, but for the Whittakers, silence is a reminder that the state took sound away. Betty, the mother who lost her children twice. Most parents lose their children once, when they grow up and leave home. But Betty? She lost her children twice in the same lifetime. First, when poverty took away their opportunities. Then again, when the state took away their bodies. She raised them without proper health care. She fed them in a house without a working refrigerator. She protected them even when she couldn't protect herself. She kept the family alive when the system didn't care to help them. And after raising them through medical conditions, poverty, ridicule, and public judgment, the government stepped in years later and said, "You can't care for them. We'll take over." Imagine being 73 years old and being told that everything you fought to keep alive is no longer yours to protect. Imagine someone taking your grown children away. Not because you abused them, not because you abandoned them, but because someone else finally noticed they need help you never received. Betty didn't lose her children due to neglect. She lost them because the world finally realized they existed. That is a cruel kind of loss. A loss that looks like help on paper, but feels like punishment in the heart. Larry, the protector, left without a purpose. Larry has always been a complicated figure. Some question his choices. Some accuse him of enabling BJ. Others say he knew exactly who to trust. But here's one truth nobody can deny. Larry took responsibility when no one else would. Was he perfect? No. Did he always know what to do? Probably not. But when strangers came too close, he barked back. When money talk caused chaos, he got angry because he didn't understand it. When cameras arrived, he acted defensive because he thought they might take something else away. Now the state has taken what he cared about most. Not money, not fame, not cameras, but family. And now Larry sits in a home with no one to protect. He waits by a phone that never rings. He stands on a porch without witnesses. He isn't guarding anything anymore. And when a protector loses their purpose, what do? They break on the inside quietly. The internet wanted justice, but it never asked what justice means to the family. People online say they wanted justice for the Whittakers. They wanted donations to go to the right place. They wanted a house built. They wanted the family safe. They wanted accountability. But they never asked, What does justice look like if the family doesn't want to be separated? What does fairness mean if it breaks their emotional connection? Is being safer worth being lonely? APS can keep them warm. APS can feed them. APS can provide beds, healthcare, structure. But APS cannot give them what Betty gave them: unity. It cannot recreate 50 years of shared survival. It cannot copy the bond of suffering together. It cannot replace a family raised by love without resources. There is tragedy in both options. Keep them together, they struggle physically. Separate them, they struggle emotionally. So which is better? There is no perfect answer. There's only pain on both sides. BJ's addiction isn't just her issue. It was a family survival strategy that failed. This part is uncomfortable, but it's true. For families with poverty and disability, the person who can work the system becomes relied upon. Not because they're stable, not because they're trustworthy, but simply because they can function outside the house. BJ could drive. BJ could bargain. BJ could talk to people. BJ could bring things home when nobody else could. Was it ethical? Sometimes no. Was it legal? Not always. But for a family who couldn't navigate society on their own, BJ became a lifeline with flaws. Families like the Whittakers don't thrive because one person is stable. They survive because everyone contributes what they can, even if what they bring is messy, even dangerous. BJ didn't just take from the house. She also brought things in the house needed. That's the contradiction outsiders never understand. Here's the brutal update. BJ might never live with the family again. Nobody wants to say it, but from a legal standpoint, it's likely. If BJ has a criminal record that continues to grow, if she doesn't enter recovery, if APS views her as a repeated risk, if her addiction remains untreated, then reunification becomes nearly impossible. Even if Ray, Timmy, and Lorraine are allowed to visit later, even if Betty is supervised in visits, even if Larry gains, the same woman who brought chaos is also the one who defended them daily. The same woman who made mistakes also fed them when no one else did. The same woman the state views as a threat is the daughter Betty cries for in silence. The heartbreaking question now: will BJ fight for them? If she chooses recovery, if she enters treatment, if she listens, accepts responsibility, and works to rebuild not her image, but her life, then not only does she heal, the entire family's fate changes. But if she refuses, if she turns to addiction for comfort, if she keeps falling deeper into instability, the separation becomes permanent. The porch stays empty. Betty grows old without the one she raised. Larry becomes bitter without the ones he protected. Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine spend their final years away from home. Their future is tied to BJ's outcome, whether she wants it or not. Comment below. Do you think BJ can recover if given treatment and support? Should the community fight for her recovery the same way they fought for accountability? Share your thoughts, backhand index pointing down. Whatever people think of BJ, whatever stories go around online, there's one fact that shapes the entire Whittaker situation today. Every member of the Whittaker family is now living with the consequences of years of poverty, misunderstanding, and outside interference, whether intentional or accidental. And because of that, the question isn't simply what did BJ do wrong? The question is, what failed her, just like it failed her family? Because when an entire family becomes known worldwide for struggling, when content creators broadcast their home without preparation for the aftermath, when viewers obsess over their disabilities without giving true support, it's not only BJ who ends up drowning. Everyone does. The Truth No article has said directly, the Whittakers weren't prepared for fame. When the first documentary video went viral, millions watched. People talked. People reacted. People felt shock. Many felt sympathy. Some even felt fascination. What the public didn't realize was this. Fame requires management. Fame requires stability. Fame requires protection. The Whittakers had none of that. There was no legal guardian to control contracts. No financial advisor to handle donations. No attorney recommending a trust. No organization trained to protect disabled adult family members in media. Instead, they faced sudden exposure without the tools to defend themselves from financial exploitation, inconsistent help, misinformation, conflicting outside influences, personal agendas, opportunistic relationships. And in the middle of all this chaos, a woman with her own vulnerabilities, who was struggling with substance issues, emotional distress, and a complicated past, became the person who held the money, handled communication, and represented them to strangers. That woman was BJ. The moment the internet walked into their life, BJ became the gatekeeper of a door she was not prepared to guard. BJ's flaws didn't appear when the money came. They were already there. One of the most misunderstood realities is this. Money doesn't create character problems, it exposes them. If a person struggles with addiction, money amplifies it. If a person struggles with impulsivity, money intensifies it. If a person struggles with instability, money destabilizes everything around them. BJ wasn't a villain invented by the internet. She was a person with challenges long before any video camera showed up. Anyone who battles addiction knows. Impulses take over. Logic fades. Fear drives choices. Survival replaces responsibility. The problem is that in the Whittakers' case, her survival became their instability. It's not as simple as saying she did wrong. It's just as true to say she wasn't helped in time. Had there been guidance from the start, proper documentation for donations, legal oversight for revenue, guardianship protections, disability advocates involved, addiction support offered early, the situation could have been prevented before it ever turned into loss. BJ didn't destroy her family alone. She struggled in a system that offered publicity before protection. APS intervention, help or harm. Adult protective services didn't act without reason. They saw what the internet only speculated on. They were concerned not just about money, but about safety, medical needs, living conditions, vulnerability to outside influence, possible neglect due to overwhelming circumstances. Their intervention wasn't an accusation. Her future choices will determine how and when the family can reunite. Even if she doesn't return to the home, her stability matters. Because if BJ keeps making destructive choices, courts may block visitation rights permanently. The family may not be allowed to attend holidays together. Betty and Larry could lose contact privileges. BJ's recovery doesn't just impact her life. It impacts every emotional thread the family still holds. If she chooses treatment, if she gets support instead of punishment, if the community encourages recovery instead of ridicule, then reunification, even in supervised terms, becomes possible. But if addiction wins, the porch will remain divided. The family will remain disconnected. The Whittakers will spend their final years in fragments instead of unity. This isn't just a legal situation. It's a race against time. Redemption isn't about proving innocence. It's about healing. Some people think BJ needs to apologize. Others think she needs to be punished. Some want justice through consequences. But addiction recovery isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming accountable and capable. Treatment isn't about fixing wrongs. It's about giving a human being the chance to become responsible enough to protect the people she loves again. BJ doesn't need to be a hero. She doesn't need to rebuild the house. She doesn't need to repair every mistake from the past. She just needs to take the first step toward becoming stable. Because stability is what her family lost. And stability is what they desperately need back. What the family needs most now. They don't need more theories. They don't need finger-pointing. They don't need hateful arguments about who's at fault. They need legal clarity so no more confusion breaks them apart. Neutral advocates, not influencers seeking recognition. Mental health support, especially for BJ. Supervised visits, so Betty doesn't die waiting to see her children again. Community protection, not pity. Respect for their dignity, not entertainment. People can't take away the past. People can't erase the viral videos. People can't undo the exposure. But people can protect what's left. Their right to remain a family in whatever way is still possible. The real tragedy isn't their poverty. It's that they were never prepared to be seen. The world looked at the Whittakers and saw disabilities. The world looked at BJ and saw irresponsibility. The world looked at Betty and saw poverty. But no one saw the truth. They were never given a chance to adapt to fame, money, or outside help before it came crashing into their home. When history is written about this family, we shouldn't remember them as victims or internet spectacles. We should remember them as a family that survived decades of hardship, only to be torn apart just when the world became aware they existed. And now we stand at crossroads. Will they be remembered as a family helped too late, or a family that finally got the support they needed? The answer will depend not on their past, but on what happens next. BJ's next choice matters. The community's next actions matter. APS's next decision matters. Honest advocacy matters. Respect matters. It's not just about fixing problems. It's about honoring the humanity of people who have been dehumanized their entire lives. Comment below. Should the community push for recovery programs, legal advocacy, and supervised visitation for the Whittakers, instead of just focusing on money and blame? Share your thoughts, backhand index pointing down. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.